As entrepreneurs, we all have a reason why we chose to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to capture those stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. At 19 years of age, Angela was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, yet she refused to let her chronic illness define her. Ambitious and career-driven, Angela built a successful career over the next decade with various Fortune 500 companies in the biotech and life sciences industries. While building her career, she maximized her income, made significant financial investments, and paid off $85,000 of student debt in 18 months. While optimizing her savings, she learned to live below her means so that she could live life on her terms. Angela started her first business in 2017 and today focuses her efforts on helping people achieve financial freedom through their careers at fireyourcareer.com. She's passionate about building a career to fuel a FIRE lifestyle because she believes that everyone deserves to live life on their own terms. In her free time, she enjoys yoga, running, and traveling. Angela lives in Salem, Oregon with her husband and 2 little boys. So, Angela, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate you being here.
Andrew, thanks for having me. I'm excited
Anytime.
to be here.
And I'm excited to have you too, because the topic that you cover is something that is really fundamental, or is a fundamental part of kind of my personal purpose and my purpose in general, not just with this podcast, but my life purpose is helping people to get out of a job they hate. Like, I have to go to work tomorrow, into a situation where it's like, I'm going to go get to do these really cool things and I'm going to make money at it, instead of saying I have to go to work because I have to make money. And so what you cover, the topics you cover really help towards that. It's a different thought process on it. But I really love what you cover. So why don't we do this? I'd like you to explain a little bit about what FIRE is.
Absolutely. So, the FIRE movement stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And it's really about building up your finances in such a way so that if you want, you can just live off of your investments. And for a lot of us, it's initially a very foreign concept. In fact, I remember the first time I came across it, I thought, that seems wild. I can't imagine how does this work? It just didn't make sense to me. But when you put the math together and you actually start to think about it, you realize, oh, actually, you can do that. It's not a way that we would traditionally think about, because when we as Americans, we think, okay, the American dream, you get a job, you buy a house, you have the white picket fence, you do all of that, and you wake up and you have your 9 to 5. But I started to realize, as I had gotten into my career early on, that a lot of these people, when they wake up, they're just miserable in their jobs. And so I started looking for a different way to live. And that's when I came across the FIRE movement. And I realized over time, not right away, I didn't realize it right away, but over time I realized that, wow, this is a different way of living that actually works, surprisingly. And
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah. And it's something that we think, oh, just rich people can do that, or, oh, just people with big corporations can do that. But FIRE is not as hard as we think it is. And it's not as intimidating. I know a lot of people get really intimidated thinking I have to start this company and build it to, $16 billion, and then I can actually do FIRE. You have a different perspective on that. And I like the perspective that you have, because I think it fills a gap between 9 to 5 and building a large company. And so would you go into a little bit about how you do FIRE, like your specific way of firing your career, if you will, like your
Absolutely.
website?
Yeah. Yeah. So the basis for Fire Your Career is to really make fire easier for people to achieve. And yes, initially it feels like something that's impossible. You think that I have to make so much money, that I have to be rich in order to do this. But the reality is that if you are really diligent with managing your finances, if you build up a successful career, which is the basis of Fire Your Career, build up a successful career, grow your income in such a way that you can have greater savings, investments, you're paying down debt, then you can fire your career. You can change careers, you can start a business, you can retire early. If you want, you can do all of these things. It actually really is a lot easier than you might initially think. And Andrew, I appreciate you bringing that up. Is that, yes, it sounds really hard, and I won't lie that it does take diligence and it takes focus. It's not something that just happens overnight. You have to work towards it, but it is a lot easier than a lot of us initially realize.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it seems really intimidating to people, or why people don't do FIRE more often, is because it does seem super intimidating. And I think there's a lot more creative ways that you can do FIRE without without all of that, well, hacking away at that intimidation. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I had a professor in college who said you can paint the wall going this way, you can paint it back and forth, you can paint it in circles, but you're still painting the wall. There's more than one way to do things.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
So, now, as far as like building in, I guess the one thing from our chat that we had earlier in the green room, I'd like to chat a little bit more about what your definition of career is, because I think it's a little different than what people might think.
Yeah. So my definition of a career, ideally for me, and I think everyone's definition is a little bit different. To me, it's something that you do that, yes, makes you some kind of an income, but it's something that fulfills you. So it's something that brings you a healthy income, but it's something that you also look forward to doing and you look forward to. And I know that's how I've approached my career. And honestly, I've found a lot more satisfaction and a lot more growth. Honestly, I think when you approach your career with this kind of a mindset, you're actually a lot more successful. And your career could be your business. It could be what you do in a 9 to 5 that actually fulfills you. It could be any number of things. Ultimately, what matters is that you're doing something that is bringing you some kind of income and it brings you joy. That's what matters.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a part of this that we were talking about earlier that that a lot of people don't necessarily think about or might think badly of, which isn't necessarily a it's not necessarily a bad direction to go in. And that's kind of like freelancers. In my industry, one of the big things is freelancers will work for like one main client, have a couple of side hustles, and do very well for themselves. They're still self-employed. It's a they like that stability. They like that this is what's going to happen. Here's what they can leave a client if they need to, but they have the freedom to be able to move. And they if like one client's budget's cut by half, they can pivot and do it very easily. I'd like you to talk a little bit more maybe about kind of how your version of things would work to somebody that basically owns a job. There's a negative connotation to that, but I don't think there is actually. I think it's a really valid way to do things.
Yeah, yeah. So the way I look at it is what the concept behind Fire Your Career is that you're doing something that fulfills you, but you're building up your finances so that you have the flexibility to choose. So you might have to work in a 9 to 5 for a while to build up your finances in such a way and pay off debt and so on. But ultimately, over time, you can transition away from that. You can transition to a freelancing career. You can transition to starting your own business, to taking a break from your career entirely, retiring early if it so fulfills you. But the idea, of course, is to get enough saved up to do enough with paying off your debt and to be able to ultimately live off of your finances or live partially off of your finances. You might have partial fire and then you're doing freelancing, or partial fire and you're building up your business, whatever it might be. Ultimately, it is about having that flexibility, but from the finance portion, it's having the diligence to save, to get your investments in such a way that they can support that kind of a lifestyle. Ultimately, it's a lifestyle that you pick, right? It's that freedom to choose.
Yeah. And so you're more in so often that transition between the 9 to 5 and maybe and other things that you can do beyond that. And I think that's an important transition that is difficult for some people because they're used to the stability of a 9 to 5. There is no
Right.
stability in entrepreneurship at all.
Right.
Like we were talking about, sometimes it's like jumping off the cliff and making the parachute on the way down. Very
Yep.
different world. And that transition can often be easier when you use this sort of a technique too. So that's why I
Agreed.
love what you do. So what are some of the techniques within Fire Your Career that you use that really help people that people may not think about? I mean, we're used to the whole, you work for the same company for a certain number of years, you build up your
Right.
retirement, you go and retire and yada, yada. What are some of the things, and you invest in stocks and it's a long play and you do these things, this is
Right.
what we're taught, the standard stuff, right?
Yep.
What sorts of things do you do differently that cause you to be able to fire, do fire?
Yeah, absolutely. So it might help to explain a little bit of my background and what I've done. And there are definitely different approaches. And what I do is I help support people along their journey, wherever they are, to do the same sort of thing or something that's a slightly different take on it. So what I've done in my career is I built up a successful career and I negotiated for income increases in my job. And I was able to do that over time in such a way so that I was able to pay off large amounts of student debt. For instance, I paid off, we had a lot of student debt, my husband and I, by the time we were done with our schooling. And it was something in the amount of, I think it was $130,000 combined between the both of us, which felt massive. and it seemed impossible initially to pay off, but we committed to paying that off, and we wanted to do that as soon as possible. It took us a while to build up some momentum, but we did that, and then we were able to pay off the last $85,000 of our student loans in 18 months. It was hard. We did have to make some cutbacks. We made some sacrifices temporarily in our lifestyle and so on in order to do that. But in doing so, we were able to free up what we were paying on a month-to-month basis so that we no longer had to reach this level, a higher level of income. We could live off of a lower level of income instead. And that gave us the flexibility over time so that we no longer relied on both of our incomes on a day-to-day basis. We didn't have to keep working and making that amount. It gave us the flexibility so that I could start my own business. And I was able to do that. And I've since pivoted away from that business and have been doing other things, but I was able to take on my own clients and do my own thing. And I didn't stress so much about making such a high level of income because I was able to make less than I was making initially. I was able to gain more freedom and flexibility in paying off my student debt. And then we also paid off some of our other debts as well. So that really, that's a very small example of what you can do. With that, you can achieve FIRE on much grander scales to the point that you don't require an income whatsoever. And if you want to retire early, you can live off of your investments following the 4% rule, which we can talk about a little bit if you'd like. But yeah, we learned that there's just so much flexibility that can be gained by following these principles. And really, they are much simpler and much more achievable than you might believe.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that 4% rule. Because what I want to do is really get people, I like to take people, and I do this in my job too, where I want them to have some reality with what you're doing. I want them to be able to put themselves into that place going, I can do this, and see themselves in it versus just hearing a whole bunch of data. So I think 4% rule would be really cool to kind of see, how does this correlate to what I'm doing right now and what do I need to change?
Absolutely. So the rule of 4% is that you can take up to 4% of what you have in your investment portfolio per year without, and this is of course averaging over investments over time, but you can take 4% per year and your investments will largely remain where they're at. So, and that's by, you can trust that with that, you will be able to maintain your investment portfolio without it continuing to go down. So you can live off of that. Now that does take into account that there are dips and rises. So it helps to have a bit of a buffer in mind for that. But a simple way to get there, if you're trying to figure out what is your FIRE number, you can rule what you're you can multiply what you are spending per year by 25. And that is a really rough number. So 25 times your yearly spending is your FIRE number. And if you achieve that FIRE number, you can trust within reason that you can withdraw 4% of those investments and continue to maintain that portfolio.
Okay. So let's say that somebody's bills were, let's kind of go in the middle range, like 6,000 a month, 5,000 a month. Let's use 5 because that's a nice easy number to multiply.
Sure.
So 5,000 a month would be what? That's 60,000 a year. And then you would take 4 times that, and that would be the amount that you would need to be able. So the 60,000.
So it'd be 25 times.
A year.
So
$60,000,
$60,000, you multiply that by 25, whatever number that is. I can't do that quick math in my head, but you get that number. That is your FIRE number, your rough FIRE number, and then you can withdraw 4% of that total FIRE number.
So that, just because I want to 60,000 times 25, that's 1.5 million.
So that's your FIRE number. If you are spending $60,000 per year, then your FIRE number is 1.5. And if your investments are $1.5 million, you can take 4% of those investments per year and spend that and have your investment portfolio maintain the same level. And this is a 95% confidence interval, just to keep in mind. So yes, there are natural dips and rises in the stock market, but that is a rule that has been shown to be consistent over time with the averages of the stock market.
Okay. Yeah, because 4% of 1.5 million is 60,000. So it kind of comes full circle and does that. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
there are other ways of doing this as well. So I'm very closely in tune with the fire movement and others that are in this kind of lifestyle. There are some people that decide to adopt a digital nomad lifestyle. A
Mhm.
digital nomad is someone that will go to a different country and live. And these other countries often have a lower cost of living than we do here in the US. So it's an interesting point to consider. Your fire number might actually be quite a bit lower than you realize if
Mhm.
you're willing to explore other alternative lifestyles. So it
Mhm.
really can be more achievable.
Yeah, and I wanted to use a somewhat generous, understanding that, like, debt's paid off, that sort of thing. Then we're at this point. I want
Exactly.
to use a somewhat generous amount, especially for folks that are in high cost of living areas, especially like
Right.
California, other places where rent is going to be 3,500 or something a month. I want to make sure people can take that into consideration. But I know my cousin just did the digital nomad, sold everything, went to went to Croatia, and much lower cost of living, and really, at least from what I see on Instagram, he does pretty well. At least from what I hear, does pretty well. But it's a lower cost of living, higher quality of life, and he can kind of
Right.
do what he wants. He is in that situation where he has like one or two major clients. He does similar things to what I do in for one or two major clients, picks up a few here, there, and there, and has a very great life, and basically is at fire at this point. He
That's
could retire
awesome.
if he wanted to. And so that's what I like the fact that you touched on that digital nomad is because here in the States, things are very expensive. Moved somewhere like Costa Rica, and it doesn't have to be a third world country. There's some Eastern European countries that have a high quality of life and a high standard of
Definitely.
living that are significantly, like Croatia is one of them, Czech Republic's one of them. Beautiful places to live, great culture, relatively safe, or at least as safe as any US city, with a cost of living that's next to nothing. I mean, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Costa Rica is a huge one. We just had somebody on from Costa Rica. We had a couple people on from Costa Rica, and Costa Rica is a country that has no military because they spend most of their money on education, and yeah, low cost of living. You know,
Yep. Yeah, so there are definitely other ways of
yeah,
looking at fire, and that makes fire achievable actually a
yeah,
lot sooner. So
yeah.
if you're willing to explore other alternatives, especially as an entrepreneur, if you have an online business, it really does just give you so much flexibility. So if you want to achieve fire even sooner, if you want to have more freedom and flexibility, there are definitely other things that you can do as well. I know that so many of us are tied to family and loved ones in the States. So that's not that sometimes that's easier said than done, right? But if you
Mhm.
have that kind of flexibility, or you're willing to explore these other alternative lifestyles, it's definitely something that can get you there sooner.
I had a friend of mine who one day moved to Bali and ended up getting married, having two kids, and just, and it was a similar thing where digital nomad, she fell in love with the country, much lower cost of living, really good country to live in. And, so there's it's being creative. And I think that's another thing, the important part of it is just do what entrepreneurs are best with. And that's coming up with, rejecting people's reality, substituting our own, and coming up with something
Absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that's a totally valid point. I mean, the fire movement is one of those things that you really do have to challenge a traditional mindset. But as entrepreneurs, we already do that.
Yeah.
So it's just something a little different. It's a different way of thinking, yes, but we already challenge our mindset. So why not something like this that can really help you adopt so much more freedom and flexibility in your life?
Yeah, and I think for us as entrepreneurs, retire is a four-letter word. We don't ever think that we're going to be able to stop. It's just, and because we're so passionate about what we do, because it's such a big part of our identity and a big part of what we do, I think stopping is different. And I know we were talking earlier about having our work-life balance as entrepreneurs are very different than with a 9 to 5. It's just a totally different mindset. And I think with retirement, that can end up that way too. One of the
Sure.
things we want as entrepreneurs is that freedom to be able to do what we want. And that retire early part can be this, depending on where you're at in your careers and where you're at in your companies.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, it's one of those things that's nice to have that option, right?
Mhm.
If you just decide, I've done what I wanted to do, I kind of want to be done for a while. You have that flexibility. You have those kind of finances so that you can do that. And it's nice to have that option. The other thing I'll point out too, as someone, so I'm someone that has struggled with a lot of health issues.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that until you struggle with your health, you don't realize how much of an impact it has on your life.
Mhm.
And you don't know that at some point in life, you might, God forbid that anyone gets sick or that something happens in your life. But the reality is that you might find a point in your life where you just can't work or you can't work the way you used to. and you might need to have that kind of flexibility and freedom. So it can also really buy you a lot of peace of mind knowing that, if something happens, at least you're prepared and you can make that transition in life a lot easier than you otherwise might be able to.
Exactly. And, I've had a couple of friends who have sold, a number of companies and have done something similar to this, basically retire early. All they do is go out and consult. They work with people they want to do. And they're still working. I put that in quotes because it's not really, they don't have to. They do it
That's
just if they
great.
want to. Now they can go on and do these other processes. So retire sounds scary. It sounds like something we just don't want to do, or something that's just, no, I'm not doing that. But there's another side to it as well. It's being able, like you said, if God forbid something happens with health, or if you just decide that, look, I'm done with the grind, I kind of want to go out and just help a whole bunch of people. It's another way to do it too.
Yeah, no, I like that too. And I know that retiring early does sometimes sound scary, and I can appreciate that. But I am one of those people that I might retire early only so I can do something else.
Yes.
So, I'll pick up and start a different business, or I might explore a different career. I'm one of those people, I like to do a lot of different things. It's just how I am. So while the idea of retire early sounds great, the reality for me at least is that I might do that and then probably do something else. I
Mhm.
like to have different things going on. It's just how I am. So yeah, while I've struggled with health issues and things like that, I've retired early and done different things already. So
Mhm. Yeah.
that's how I like to look at it. You don't have to retire. You can take a bit of a break, but then
Mhm.
you can do
Yeah.
something else.
Exactly. Exactly. So, as we're getting towards the end of the episode here, I do have one question that I ask everyone, and that is one book or podcast that has had a significant impact on your life.
Yeah, so there've been quite a few, honestly, and it was hard for me to narrow down one, but the one I guess that's been on my mind recently is Simon Sinek's Find Your Why. I
Mhm.
think he has a great episode. If you haven't seen it, it's great. And then his book is also really meaningful as well. It really helped me understand more of my purpose, what drives me, what excites me. And I think that's really important, especially as entrepreneurs, to understand that. So if you haven't explored that side of yourself, I think it's a really valuable effort.
Awesome. Well, Angela, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it. You brought a huge amount of wisdom and a gap that I think people have difficulty with, and that's that transitioning, especially transitioning from a standard 9 to 5 you hate to something a little bit different, and then some of the future of that, and actually going out and creating a lifestyle that we want versus just having a lifestyle we endure, creating a lifestyle we want. And so I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Andrew. It's been great to be here.
Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Angela, check out the link in the description.